What is going on, guys? Blink here, back with a new guide. I'll be talking about defending yourself from rockets and increasing your chances of winning the fights. Also, the V-Bucks giveaway is still going on, so make sure to visit the link in the description to enter. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications as I post an Amazon gift card code in the comments every time I upload. By turning on notifications, you'll have a way better chance of getting here first and redeeming that code. Anyways, guys, let's get to this guide. So, Endgame, my opponent had a rocket launcher and had already had his base made. He was loving life. So, I had to make myself a base inside the circle. He had the high ground and I wasn't getting it, which is fine. I used my ramps to push to my desired spot and built myself a fort. Remember to use your ramps when pushing and make sure to pay attention to where your opponent is. Also, some players forget to check if you have a campfire, if you need a heal. Sometimes I notice my friends having campfires and they forget they have them. So make sure you're checking your utilities. Now, how do you want to face your opponent if he's got the high ground? You'll usually want to have a wall in front of you and not the stairs. The reason you want the wall in front of you is because you're not guaranteed to be safe from your opponent's view. When you have the stairs in front, you don't know if your opponent can see a pixel of your head in his view. It's much harder to predict if you're safe from his view. Now, you want to listen to those rockets. The closer it gets, that's when you build those walls. After every shot, you want to try peeking out with the sniper and go for a headshot. Now, I wasn't able to do that because I was too close to his fort. He kept spamming rockets over and over and then added in his rifle to try to get a rocket inside my fort. I wasn't able to reload or peek because of all this. So that's when I edited my way behind my fort for more cover. Use those floors to stop yourself from any sort of fall damage. This will give you more time to peek over and reload your weapons. Now, every time he shot his rocket towards me, I would have built a wall and a roof because the angle he was shooting at, he could have hit the edge of my fort and I could have had potentially took some splash damage. So if you're not sure, then add the extra wall or roof to avoid taking any damage. I dropped down below once again because I wasn't getting enough time to reload my weapon. When you don't have time, change your positioning. You should also do this to keep your opponent guessing. One more tip is if you aren't sure you'll have time to reload your weapon and the rock is coming in, then don't reload it. Place the materials first. You might get punished because you want to get that reload off. So all I had to do is wait for him to keep repeaking and all I need to do is hit my sniper shot. It's not hard to defend from rockets. I'd rather have my opponent shooting rockets at me than trying to snipe me. Rockets aren't that fast when you're at a medium distance and you can easily block them with materials by just looking or even just by listening. Listening is key when you're fighting opponents at closer ranges. So in this situation I had a rocket launcher and as I said, it's easier to use when you have the high ground. I ended up doing some damage to my opponent and one great tip I can give you guys from this clip is if you can see an opening under your opponent's 1x1, then shoot the rocket under it. It'll go right under the wall and kill your opponent. Because as you guys know, building in some spots can expose the under part of your fort. So if you're the one inside that 1x1, then add a floor to prevent the rocket from entering. And for some reason, even placing a floor down won't stop the rocket in some situations. Just a nice little hack for you guys. Now, this next situation, I was between two players. They both ended up shooting rockets at me, so I had to push one because I was being pressured by both. Ended up pushing with my stairs, but I pulled out my weapon because I knew he was going to re-peek me as I did have the low ground. Got a few hits off and started applying a little bit of pressure. We ended up fighting for the high ground and I beat him to it. And I can't forget about the other opponent as he tried destroying our materials, but I ended up sniping him, which made it a 1v1. Now, this last player tried to heal and all I had to do is destroy his materials to not allow him to heal. He tried reloading his rocket the moment I shot his roof off. Thankfully, I got the kill with the help of the high ground. Here's a closer combat example of when my opponent has rockets. So in closer situations, you always want to build a wall in the direction your opponent is. This will avoid you getting hit by a rocket, which makes sense. You also want that high ground because your opponent will not hit you with your rocket as long as you build. Now, if he had the high ground, it's a lot easier for him to direct a shot down to potentially hit you. So another way of fighting is to take shots as you rebuild your front wall. If you have a sniper, I recommend using it the most, although use whatever weapon you're comfortable with. Now, that front wall is very important, so make sure you rebuild it after every rocket that hits it. You don't want your opponent to be able to destroy the stairs you're on. Now, one of my opponents tried building above me, so I had to try grabbing the high ground back. If you face two players, you want to grab that high ground back no matter what the situation is, because it's a lot harder to spot both players when one of them is now above you and has an easier angle to spot you. The last player had pushed me and actually ended up pushing me wrong. If you guys have seen my video that I posted a few days ago, which was building and pushing tips to win more gunfights, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But check that video out to find out what this player did wrong. Now, in this last endgame situation, after taking a lot of damage, I want to avoid getting hit by anything else. This opponent tried to rocket spam me and AR me down, so your best bet is to flip your stairs in his direction for that extra cover, and make another little base behind yours for more support. The stairs didn't flip both times because Fortnite has this edit glitch where it won't let you edit, and this can get you killed unfortunately. I also accidentally placed a jump pad and had to create another little box beside it. I now had a lot more cover for my opponent, and this allowed me to heal without the worry of getting shot. Alright, so in this next example, the opponents had rocket launchers and grenade launchers. When the rockets were fired, once again, you would rebuild your wall as you shoot your weapon or reload it. If your fort gets destroyed by the rocket launcher, then quickly rebuild it and repeat the steps. Now, if your opponent has a grenade launcher, then you don't want to rebuild your fort. You want to push him. If you keep rebuilding your fort, all your opponent has to do is shoot the grenades in your general direction, and you'll end up taking a lot of damage or even getting killed because of it. So when you push, his grenade launcher won't be as deadly because you're always on the move, which means you don't get piled up with a bunch your grenades. Now, what if it's the last team or opponent? Then depending on the situation, you might have to play it differently. My opponent wasn't trying to lob any grenades inside the fort, so we didn't have to worry about pushing. He tried to destroy the bottom, and we were also on a hill, so I knew most of the grenades weren't going to connect onto the fort. So as he does that, try to put some shots on the other team. Now, if the fort did end up collapsing, then don't worry, build a new one. Push your opponents to avoid taking damage from multiple grenades. I also ended up getting a little lower without giving up the high ground, because the fort was a little higher than 3 stories, and as you guys know, anything higher than 3 stories, you'll end up taking damage. So my teammate pushes and gets knocked out, and one of the other opponents gets knocked out too. I pushed to not allow the revive and ended up killing him because I grabbed the high ground quicker. Now let's quickly recap both weapons. So with the rocket, if your opponent is above you shooting rockets, then make sure you have a wall in front of you and not the stairs, because you don't know if your opponent can see you. Now if your opponent is below you shooting rockets, then you want to make sure your stairs are pointing towards your opponent, and you rebuild the front wall as you peek out and reload your weapon. Pointing the stairs towards your opponent will give you 2 support lines, which is the wall and the stairs. You don't want your opponent to destroy your stairs, so make sure you're rebuilding the wall every time. If your opponent tries grabbing the high ground, then you need to fight for it, because it's a lot easier to take shots with a rocket from above, and you can't allow that. So make sure you practice your building. Now with the grenade launcher, most of the time you'll want to push your opponent to avoid multiple nades exploding in the spot you're not moving in. If they're being launched inside your fort, that's when you'll automatically want to jump out and push your opponent. Or if he destroys your fort, then don't rebuild it, push him. So the guided missile is the last thing we'll talk about. Now what do I think about this weapon? Well, it can be annoying to fight against, but it can be a game changer using it. So let's talk about really the only way I can figure out countering it, which would be pushing your opponent. You might need to box yourself in if your opponent is targeting you as you push. Solos is much easier to kill off players with homing missiles, but in duos his teammate could actually easily get to you and put more pressure because you're boxed in waiting for that missile to detonate. Now let's talk about pushing the missile. So if you're not being targeted, then you'll probably be able to sneak up on the player with the homing missile. But if you're being targeted constantly, then once again, box yourself in every time and wait for that detonation as you push closer and closer. Now with the guided missile, you can actually use it at close range battles too. Use it to get in behind your opponent without exposing yourself. This isn't always good to do because you can't defend yourself when using the missile, so you must find your target as quick as possible. It's also very good to use when your opponents don't build and they just stare at it. Basically very good to use against players that don't build too well. You don't need to expose yourself to every player in the server in order to do damage on other players that don't build. Now if your opponents are building, you can't really squeeze in the missile into the forts unless you're playing duos. My teammate would focus on one fort wall and try to shoot it down. As he did that, I would try to squeeze in the missile after the wall breaks. It's not easy to do, but it's doable for sure. Now I do want to make a super in-depth guided missile guide on the best ways to counter it and use it. This will take some time to figure everything out because it's still fairly new, and I want to provide the best legitimate methods possible for you guys, so expect a super in-depth video on it soon. Well, that's it for this guide. Hope you guys have learned something new, and a like and a sub would be greatly appreciated as it does help me out a lot. Anyways guys, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day or night, and I'll see you on the next one.